We want to welcome you to Intersect, a podcast about finding connection in each other's story. Today I'm here with my co-host Lauren.
Hello.
And Mr. Austin Rotinsulu.
Hello.
Austin is a student here at Southern.
Mm-hmm.
Last year he was a student missionary. And tell us a little bit about where you were, and then we're just going to dive in. And Lauren, don't hesitate to jump in with any questions you might have along the way. And here we go.
I'm excited.
So I was in SM in Palau, which is a small country about a few hundred miles east of the Philippines. It has a population of 18,000, so a pretty small country. And I was over there teaching 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade math for the elementary school, for a SDA school down there.
Okay.
That was my last year.
Yeah, and what prompted you to say, I want to go to the Pacific?
Well, my brother, who is 5 years older than me, also came to Southern, and during his time here, he decided that he wanted to be a student missionary. So he went to Thailand and taught English in Thailand. And just listening to his stories that he told me and the experiences that he had and how kind of life-changing it was, it kind of inspired me to want to become an SM. But going into college, I wasn't really sure if that's something I wanted to commit to, just because it's kind of a large time commitment. But I think through like the SM Vespers, and I think what the final thing that got me was my Bio 2 professor, Dr. Thornton. He was kind of talking about his daughter's experience being in college. And he just kind of told us that this is really the time to take and like do all the opportunities that we have. Because after college, so I'm a pre-med biology major. After this, the plan is kind of to just work, and I'm going to be working for the rest of my life. So that was kind of a scary thought for me, and that convinced me like I should really take this opportunity, because after college, I'm really not going to have something it's not going to be as easily accessible to become an SM after these 4 years. So I think he was kind of like my biggest push to wanting to become an SM, is just realizing that this is such a unique opportunity that I have been set up to take right now. So I couldn't really pass up on that.
Yeah, that's really cool. One of the things we think about, or I think about a lot, is how, our lives intersect with the lives of others. So your brother being like, wow, I was a student missionary. And so, that was significant. So you're hearing your brother, and then, maybe you didn't expect, but now you're in a class with a professor and he says something about his daughter's experience. And so this texture of interplay, and how that influences our decisions.
Yeah. I mean, like, I just feel like every time it was talked about, I just was more called to it. And it just kept coming up in my life. And it was always something that came up in conversation. And I was like always pushing it off, like, maybe we'll see but I just kind of want to get done in school. But finally, that was what made me decide, like, yeah, this is something that I should do right now.
And when it keeps coming up, it seems like it's more than just the people. It's almost like God's trying to tell you something through the, yeah. Wow. Cool. So then you end up in Palau. And what was that like, just showing up to this new place and new faces and new culture and, getting into teaching? What was that experience like as you arrive and start to experience it all?
So it was really exciting because it's kind of cool to just think of it as a break from my life. There was a lot of things happening in my life at that point. A few months prior to going to Palau, my mom passed away, and I was unsure. Before she passed away, I was unsure whether I even wanted to commit to becoming an SM, because it was very obvious that she was getting more sick and that she wouldn't have much time left. So I was ready to commit to just staying home and being with her for that first semester and seeing what would happen. But then she passed away, and I feel like that was like the final thing holding me back from becoming an SM. And so it was kind of nice being able to just escape from what seemed like was tedious and just being away from things. But finally getting there, it was definitely an adjustment. Luckily for me, Palau isn't super. When you think of like mission experience, I hear a lot of stories of my friends from like Bolivia, who they didn't have any AC. They had to like it was like a very different life from here in America. But in Palau, there was a lot of accommodations. So I didn't really feel like I was going into a third world country or anything. Like we had AC, we had Wi-Fi everywhere. We had our grocery store. We could buy apples and grapes. So that was pretty cool. It wasn't super jarring to be like, it wasn't such a shift in my daily life. But it was definitely a different type of people that I was around, who had a kind of different just outlook on life and a different, like they're way more conservative in Palau. So that was a little bit different to adjust to. And just becoming a teacher when I didn't really have the training for it was very challenging. I feel like I didn't really have the resources or didn't have the preparation needed to be an effective teacher at first. And I kind of was just like thrown in there. And like this teaching job isn't like a teacher's assistant. It's not like I was helping out as a teacher. Like I was a full-blown teacher, teaching 8 to 11-year-olds how to do math, And so like it was definitely such a shift from just focusing on myself to now having to focus on these children's futures, because like the outlook of their life is very dependent on how I teach them, and that was a lot of pressure. And so it was just different, and it was a great challenge because I think I just grew so much. But yeah, I really had a lot of fun there.
Wow. Well, so it sounds like you kind of just like went to Palau right after you went through a really hard experience. So that must have been like a lot of faith that it took to just like leave, especially like in the intense program. You said you're a biology major, so I know that's hard to like step out. Can you share a little bit about like your faith experience? And I mean, personally, that would have taken a lot of faith for me to leave, and especially since you went through such a hard time just losing your mom right before. Share a little bit about kind of how God was with you. Yeah.
So I think the easiest way to do that is just kind of say the timeline of my my decision to become an SM. So I decided to become an SM second semester of my freshman year of college. But in March was when COVID hit. And so my original plans to become an SM like completely dropped. And that was actually a blessing that I didn't realize because later on that year, in around May, my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And then so like had I committed to becoming an SM, that diagnosis would have like pulled me away from it anyways. And so COVID was kind of a blessing for me. I don't want to say it was a blessing because I know so many people's lives were negatively impacted from that. But for me, it was just kind of a time where I can be home. And especially with my mom being diagnosed with lung cancer, like just having that time to be with her for that year and like just, spending more time with her was like, I value it so much now. Like even though before, during that time, I think I was only thinking about like, I just want to go back to school. I want to be with my friends. What am I doing at home? I didn't realize the impact that this diagnosis was going to have on our family. And it's honestly like looking back at it now, like such a blessing that I was able to spend that extra time with her during the summer, like being forced to stay home and stay with my mom and just hang out with her.
So there's really like this texture of timing in terms of the way that God shows up and works in our lives, timing. And then he's like working on multiple fronts. He's working on the reality of the family front with you and your mom and just the timing of that. But then on your personal growth and development front of, life calling and how maybe this whole trip plays into that. And so, we visited with another person that we're going to hear from in this podcast series where timing in their journey coming from like Egypt to Southern was so critical. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. And so, that summer I got to spend time with my mom, and it was like a really like I think we just needed that time together because I didn't realize it at that point because I thought she was going to be getting better and like we were going to get through this. But at that point, I didn't really realize that she was going to pass away. But now like I just really appreciate that time we did have. But then coming back to school that following fall, the thought of becoming an SM never really left. And then so I heard TJ Simmons, he talked for the SM Vespers, and he talked about his experience in Palau. And again, that kind of like sparked my interest in becoming an SM. And so I called my mom like every now and then and would bring it up. It's like, hey, there's something I really want to do. Like, what do you think I should do? And she was very adamant that like I stay home just because she wants me home. And like, I was like, okay, that's very reasonable. And then so that whole year passes, and it had been brought up a few times, and I talked to her about it a few times. But then like a week before school ended, my sophomore year, my mother had to be admitted into the hospital because her lungs were filling up with liquid. And I knew at that point that like she was kind of close to death. I didn't really realize to that extent. I thought she was gonna be able to leave the hospital. And I thought that like she'd just be at home, like on bed rest for like a few months. And I was just gonna do that with her. So going home, it was a wild drive going home. So I live in Colorado, so it was about 19 hours. And literally that week, I got a call from my brother. Said, hey, I had to put mom in the hospital because she's not doing well. And driving home for 19 hours, all I could think about was like, I need to get home to see my mom, make sure that I can see her like while she's still conscious. So luckily I got home on time during Mother's Day and gave her some flowers, talked to her. And again, like the hospital said that she was doing better. And so I thought she was going to be able to leave. And I asked her again, because again, the thought of being an SM just never left my mind. And I asked her, like, hey, this is something I'm really thinking about. I really want to go to Palau and serve in Palau. What are your thoughts on that? And what she told me was like, no matter what I wanted to do or no matter what I did, she trusted that that it was a prayerful decision and that it was going to be the right decision for me. Like whether I stayed home or whether I went, that was going to be whatever decision I made was the right decision. And so I was kind of upset because that's not the answer I was looking for. I was looking for a go or stay home or go become an SM. But it kind of gave me a assurance that like my mom trusted my decision, no matter what I decided to do. So a few days passed, and I had ultimately decided that I wanted to stay home. And the morning I was going to go visit her and tell her that I was going to stay home and be with her for however long it takes for her to recover, like even if it meant I was going to skip school for the first semester. That morning, my dad called me and told me that my mom was no longer responsive and that she was on like DNR order and that she was not going to make it for the day. And so it's kind of like, I was kind of like questioning God just in that point, because I thought I was making the right decision by staying home. And just as I made that decision, literally hours after, it seems like the only thing that was holding me back from making that decision was taken away from me. So I felt like my calling to become an SM, there's nothing holding me back anymore once my mom passed away. And like that was the one thing one thing I had to focus on was becoming a student missionary. Because the one thing, I don't want to say that like God killed my mom, because I don't think he did. But I think I had relief seeing when she finally passed away, because over that year I just saw her deteriorate so much. And like not having to see her go through that pain anymore was very relieving. And I know that had I made a decision to become an SM and she was still very sick, I wouldn't have made that decision with like a clear conscience. So her passing away was like kind of a blessing, just because I knew that she was no longer in pain, and my decision to become an SM, there's nothing holding me back for that. And like I could just focus on that, and that was my new next step. So it was kind of like a bittersweet moment when she finally passed away. Just because, just not having to see her in pain anymore was like such a huge thing for us.
And when we had lunch the other day and I asked you about med school and what you were potentially thinking about in terms of, a focus, I think you had mentioned pediatric oncology.
Yeah, pediatric oncology.
And oncology is like cancer,
yeah.
right? Mm-hmm. So that just kind of blows me away hearing this texture of this story, because I think sometimes the experiences that we have even if they're painful, can potentially end up shaping the way that we think about calling or direction.
Yeah.
Where here you end up in a country with working with children, and then, your mom's experience, and even how your mom's experience played into how you decide to go. And just the timing of that just is,
Yeah, but I completely agree. Like, I don't know, it's crazy how God works. And I can seeing in the moment, I think it's so hard to see how God is working. But just looking back at it now, I just see that God was in it the whole time. And he was laying the steps and laying the foundation so that I could do this thing and be all in on it.
Wow, that's super powerful. So when you were actually in Palau, how soon after your mom passed away did you go to Palau?
So my mom passed away late, or May 13th, and I flew out to Palau July 31st. So 2 months.
Wow, so that was pretty soon afterwards. What are some experiences in Palau that you remember being super impactful, on your spiritual journey and sort of the way you were dealing with the different things going on in your life?
So I think one of the biggest struggles I had in Palau, I think there's two large things that happened to me in Palau. One of my biggest struggles in Palau was kind of feeling that I was underqualified, and I was kind of not giving these kids what they needed to succeed. And I just kind of came at myself for that, just because it's such a difficult job, and I had not received any training prior to that. And so this thought that I wasn't doing enough as a missionary, and I wasn't where I meant to be, kind of haunted me. Just not for long stretches of time, but it's just a recurring thought that would happen. But I think just at the end, I had one of the parents who had taken me out for lunch, just because she wanted to thank me for kind of what I've done, and she was just very supportive in how I was teaching her kids, and it was just very nice to have that affirmation that even though I didn't feel like I was being impactful, even though I didn't feel like I was qualified or doing the best work I could have been, I was still able to impact someone's life, and they were still very appreciative of the time I put in, and they felt that I did a great job, and so it kind of just a reoccurring statement that comes always in the missions department is God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called, right? And I completely felt that because I was not qualified at all. And even through my struggles and thinking I wasn't doing an amazing job, again, God was working in the background to make sure that I was doing my job, and I was doing it effectively. So that was pretty cool. And I think the one biggest spiritual experience for me while I was in Palau was I talked to Pastor Moon about this during our lunch, but previous years before COVID, those SMs would every single Sabbath would go to the prison, maybe 100 yards away from the church. So we just walk over there. Every single week they would go to the prison and do prison ministry. So they would run a Sabbath service for the prisoners and just sing some songs and have a message for them. And they do that every single week. Because we had this, we had COVID looming over us. They kind of wanted to prevent as much contact as possible. But the prison still allowed us to come in once a month and do some ministry there. So once a month we'd go in. So we went in August. So it was the first Sabbath of every month. We went in August, September, and October before COVID hit and kind of stopped us from going. But just going each time was such a crazy experience because every time I went, I just kind of felt this I felt like I was in the wrong place. Who am I to be going in ministering to these people when I feel again, I didn't feel qualified. I feel I didn't really feel I was the right person for the job. And I kind of had this imposter syndrome because these people who were in there had they had messed up before. That's why they're in prison. And they have had a life-changing experience while in prison to kind of change their life around. And they have turned their life around towards God in prison, you know? Whereas for me, like, my testimony, I feel like, personally, is just not quite as stark or as, like, I didn't really have that turnaround that they did. Like, in my life, I've been Adventist my whole life. I've been raised in the church the whole life. You know, I didn't really like have a rebellious phase or leave the church or anything. So my life has kind of just been like kind of stagnant, just always doing the same thing. Like, this is what I knew for my whole life. But for them, like, they turned their life around, and now they have new hope that in Christ, and they have new hope of redemption and justification. And I think the time this was most apparent was in October. It was 13th Sabbath at the church, the previous week, I think. And then so our principal had the great idea of like doing a communion service with the prisoners there. And so it was just the guys that went over there, and we had a chaplain that was from we had a chaplain who was from the U.S. military. He was coincidentally Adventist too, so he hung out with us a lot. And so he came over to the prison with us, and he kind of led our communion service. And my partner was a guy, his name is Burton. And we broke bread with each other. We did the Eucharist ceremony, and then I washed his feet. He washed my feet. And again, this like thought of imposter syndrome kind of came in, where like, how am I gonna come in here and feel like I'm ministering to them when my life or my faith, I doubt my life and faith as strong as his, because for him, he had messed up, but he was able to turn his life around in prison and kind of recommit himself to God, where I've never really had that, like, quite a strong experience as that. And so I kind of felt like the roles should have been kind of reversed, you know, because this is such a strong man of like, with a strong pillar of faith, who, because of his like experience, has turned his life around. Whereas for me, I've just kind of always been Adventist, and I feel like I was kind of an imposter of my faith at that point. And so doing the communion with him kind of just like was such a humbling experience for me, and kind of it made me reevaluate my faith and kind of my experience with Christ. That was such an impactful experience for me. But then after that point, some people with COVID came, and then so the whole island got COVID, and so prison ministry got shut down for a while. So we weren't really able to go do prison ministry from December to March, December to April. We were able to do prison ministry, so we were able to go in and like see how these people were doing. So a lot of time had passed from doing the communion until the end of the year, and I thought that it wasn't going to be like that big of an experience for Burton, because like I thought that it was a bigger experience for me. But at the end of the year, we had word from one of our other missionaries that he had carved all of us these things called storyboards. So in Palau, they had this really cool thing where it's kind of like a piece of wood. It's probably like a foot by foot. And it is hand carved, and in each carving there would have a legend of one of the local legends in Palau. And so he had made, I think, 6 for each of the SMs that were leaving that year. And when he was giving it to our friend Joe, he said, I'm giving this to everyone, but make sure that Austin is the first person to choose, because he was the one that washed my feet in October, and I want him to have the first choice of the storyboard. And I don't know, for me, that was just such a impactful statement from him, because like, again, it showed me that I did impact his life, and that what I was doing was making a difference, and that I don't really have to feel like an imposter, where like my ministry is helpful, and that together we kind of like strengthened each other's faith. And so it was really cool, like just that one experience of doing communion together, he carved all these storyboards for all of us, and he called me out by name because he remembered who I was. So I think that was a really, really cool experience I had in Palau. So
I love that. And I pulled out my cell phone here, which is like taboo when you're having conversation. But it just made me think of a promise. And I was trying to find that promise in the message to the 7 churches. And I think maybe I'm trying to get there. So the message to the church of Pergamum, which I think is the third of the 7 churches. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who is victorious, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will also give that person a white stone with a new name written on it. And name biblically has this texture of character or experience. And so it's almost like the storyboard in Palau is like, what if, like, when we get to heaven, God is going to give us all kind of a storyboard of the ways that his grace has prevailed in our lives, and it'll be kind of like written in stone, that our names that we receive will represent the stories of the ways that he's shown up for us and shown up through us. I don't know. That's just what came to mind as you were sharing that about just that experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing that. Those are some really impactful stories. Sounds like a cool experience you had over there.
And if we can twist your arm, I don't know, but we'll see. But I know that you mentioned one of the stories of Palau, even of that same prison that you visited, was the story of Melissa, who returned there after a personal tragedy. I don't want to give too much of a spoiler, but I did reach out to Melissa, and she got back to me. She's actually about to give birth.
Yeah.
So she's like, if you guys can be flexible, I'd totally be willing to come on with you guys on Riverside and do a podcast where we hear some of her story. And I was hoping maybe you could join us for that. And then,
sure. That'd be great.
Just to trade notes and just see how maybe what is the intersect between your story and her story, since you were kind of both there and both were in the prison, so.
Yeah, and her testimony is amazing. If you have the opportunity to watch the movie that was made over her story, it's called Return to Palau. It's just such great insight into what happened. I think it happened 20 years ago, but it's still so impactful today, and it's a story that still resonates with so many people today. So,
and I don't know if you experienced this today, but I know for me what I've experienced is sometimes just in the telling of my story, I realize it's way more significant than I thought it was when I'm just kind of with myself and my own thoughts. I've really been impacted by your story.
Thank you. Praise God.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think all the people who end up listening to this will also be super blessed. So we just want to say a huge thank you for joining us on Intersect and sharing about your story and how God has led you.
Yeah,
and we're excited to hear from you and Melissa coming up soon.
Yeah.
All right. So with that, we say until next time, go intersect for God's glory.